Hey everybody, and welcome to day one of the 5-day first chapter challenge. I am Halie, your host, and I would love if you guys are just joining us now, please go back and watch day 0 first. That is going to give you all the information that you need to go forward with this challenge, as well as giving you the homework assignments that you're going to want to download so that you have these worksheets to work through and you can work on your first chapter instead of just watching me work on mine. Now, today's topic is beginning the story, which probably seems pretty straightforward, but we are going to take a deep dive into how to do this well and some of the things that really don't work. So thank you so much for being here. Go ahead and subscribe to this channel if you haven't already. And then if you're ready to get started, go ahead and grab a cup, cozy up, and let's get to writing. All right, guys, so you will notice that the title of today's video is Beginning the Story, which is different from beginning the book. So what I really want to focus on more than anything else today is, where does your story start? And is your first chapter beginning in the right place? Because we can work on first lines and character introductions and everything else all day long, but if we are starting the story in the wrong place, it's all a moot point because you're probably gonna have to redo it later anyways. Now today I want to talk about prologue and inciting incidents and your plot, but let's go ahead and start with prologues because there is a raging debate in the writing community right now, and probably for a long time, but about whether or not prologues are actually necessary. And I want to give you guys my 2 cents on this because I think that the reason this debate is even happening is because prologues are being misused. So I personally don't mind if you do prologues. I have prologues in several of my books. They can work, but what I think isn't working with readers today is a prologue that is so far removed from the story that we just end up putting it at the front and calling it a prologue. And this is why a lot of readers are skipping prologues, is because they aren't directly relevant to the story. You're fine without them. And honestly, if your readers are fine without something, you probably shouldn't be including it in the book. That is really how I feel about it, because personally as a reader, if I read through a prologue and realize I didn't actually need to read that, I feel like I've wasted my time. And so where we are really going wrong with prologues is that we are not starting where the story starts. So that prologue is either 50 years beforehand, or it's written from a different character's point of view who's not actually part of the story. What I really want to get at here is that if your story is about an evil witch who's gonna find the good in herself and become good over the course of the story, you have to realize that that is the story. And so 50 years beforehand, the story of how she became evil, while you can make the argument that that is relevant, I mean, it is, but it's a different story and we didn't need it. The story that is at hand is that the witch is evil and is going to become good. So I would be okay if you had a prologue showing just how evil she is, if she's just out doing something absolutely horrible, because that is directly relevant to the story we're about to start telling. If the story is that she starts evil and becomes good, then it's okay to start with her being evil. But what isn't working for me is when we tell these side stories, which yes, they are related to the main story, but they are not directly a part of the main story. And so that is where I really think we're going wrong with prologues. But I also see this happen in first chapters too, where we are not starting with the main story at hand. And so we need to talk about inciting incidents first and foremost, because that is where the story begins. So if our main plot is the simple story of the evil witch becoming good, the inciting incident would be the thing that happens that sets that story into motion. Maybe that witch is out doing a bunch of evil stuff, she sees a kid who's in danger and she ends up not even knowing why, but she rescues the kid and then gets this really good warm feeling. And then that sets her on the journey of wanting to discover whether maybe being good is okay. That is what an inciting incident is. It sets the plot into motion. It sets whatever journey your hero is going to go on into motion. It's the moment when your female character runs into the man on the street who she's been pining after for years. She spills his coffee all over him. And even though it's a terrible moment, it's the first time that he has actually ever noticed her. And so they start their relationship right there, and what you're going to build as the romance of your story. The inciting incident is when your character's mother is killed by alien bugs, and so they realize they have to go join the space army to fight the bugs off. It's the moment when your character finds out that they can win 1,000 gold pieces and save their family farm if only they can go slay the dangerous dragon. The inciting incident is what sets the plot into motion. But here's the catch about this, is that Most people, when they're writing their first draft, don't actually fully know what their plot is. And I absolutely include myself in this. I almost always will write the entire book and then spend a month or two reading through it before I figure out, oh my gosh, this is my main plot. And if that sounds crazy to you, I want to ask you, first of all, if somebody comes up to you and says, what is your book about? Is that a question that sparks panic because you don't know how to describe what your book is about? Or do you have that really awesome answer of, oh, it's about this character whose mom is murdered by bugs, so he joins the space army to go kill the bugs in return? And this is going to be kind of tough to hear, but if that question sparks panic because you don't know how to describe what your book is about, it means you're having a tough time figuring out what your plot is. And if we haven't figured out what the main plot is yet, it's really hard to know what the inciting incident is, because it's hard to get the plot started if we don't have a really clear vision of what it is. Now, I have another really great video about plot that I want you guys to watch if you're still in that boat and you don't know how to describe what your book is about. This may help you out a lot, but we are also going to be working on it in our homework today. We're going to be looking at what is your plot and really trying to nail that down so that we can really look at what is your inciting incident, what is the thing that gets the plot moving, and then lastly, we can look at, is our story starting in the right place? Are we describing a bunch of mundane things that don't matter as we lead up to the inciting incident? Are we writing 10 chapters of other stuff before we get to the inciting incident, which really is the story? And I do want to clarify, you don't have to have the inciting incident in your first chapter. What a lot of stories will do is they have that inciting incident interrupt a part of the character's everyday life. So we do sometimes need to build that up first, build up what is being interrupted, which means that we don't always have the inciting incident right off the bat. And that's okay. If your first chapter doesn't have it, what matters is that we are definitely leading up to it. We're still making sure that we are starting the story in the right place and not 50 years too soon, or not with the wrong character, or not in a place that doesn't make sense for the story that we're trying to tell. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna go ahead and take a look at what we have for the homework today. And we're gonna be focusing a lot on the plot, on the inciting incident, and just making sure that we are starting the story in the right place. And if we're not, finding perhaps a better place to start it. So for the sake of the homework, I am gonna actually use my first book to answer some of these questions as we go through. I'm totally fine if you guys haven't read it. This is just kind of giving examples of how I would describe my plot, which I do think it's important for you guys to know. I did spend like 11, 12 years on this book before it came out, so I had a lot of time to figure out the plot, and honestly, it probably wasn't until year like 9 or 10 of that I had my solid plot. So there were years of time where I had a book in my hands and not a solid plot. And when people would ask, what is your book about? It would take me 5 minutes to explain kind of the backstory and what's going on and what the character wants. I didn't have this really solid plot line until much, much later in my writing process. So if you guys don't have one yet, I don't want you to feel bad. This is part of creating your masterpiece, and it's very likely that there is still a lot of room for improvement on it. So for the homework, our very first prompt is to describe your character's main goal of the overall story. Now you'll notice there are only 2 lines to do this because it should not take 5 minutes to describe what your book is about. What matters the most is the main conflict. And again, if you guys want to check out the video on that from the 60-day challenge, it is immensely helpful if you guys are still struggling with this. So for mine, I said, Allie needs to recover her forgotten past and remember how she saved hundreds of lives, and she has to do it before she's caught by monsters. So, short, sweet, to the point, right? And the next thing is, what main thing is your reader rooting for as they read through this story? And I said that my characters are rooting for Allie to figure out why she's so important, and they want to figure out who the handsome new stranger is so we know whether he's the romantic interest or he's an enemy. The next question that I want you guys to ask yourself is, what stands in the way of your characters reaching this overall goal? And for me, I said monsters are hunting my main character, and the only thing that brings her memories back is life-threatening danger, because, you know, she's got like survival instincts that bring back flashes of the past, but only to save her life. So for her to discover who she was, she has to risk death itself. And I kind of want to tell you guys, this part of the story did not come in until like the 11th hour of when I finally got my very first professional review of my book, and I had somebody say, you know, it's not that interesting. Where's your driving force behind it? What is the plot? I had to give my main character a way to actively seek those memories, because the way that I had it originally was just that, you know, she's bebopping through life and then finds a clue here and finds a clue there, but you can't root for someone who's bebopping. Like, you have to have a character who is actively seeking something, and you have to give them a way to actively be searching for their solution. And so it took me a really, really long time to find what that was. But for me, what I had to do was give my main character a way to proactively seek her solution. And that is when I finally had a way for the readers to root for her. Because they're like, yeah, go put yourself in that danger, get those memories back, but, you know, survive at the same time. They had finally something to root for. And so if you don't have that, if you don't have a reason for your readers to root for the character, you're missing something crucial. And I really want you to think about what you could add in. Really, the main thing that you can give them is a way to solve the problem themselves, so that as a reader, we can root for them to be successful in that. Now, with those 3 questions about your plot out of the way, the next thing that we're going to look at is, what is your inciting incident? So mine actually was in the first chapter, and it's actually like kind of on page 1, which is that Halie wakes up with blood on her hands, no idea how it got there, and she's realizing that danger is the only thing that brings her memories back. That all happens in chapter 1. And for me, I did have that other subplot of, you know, trying to figure out who the handsome new stranger is, which doesn't come in for a couple more chapters. So that one kind of has its own inciting incident, which is meeting him and realizing that something's up with him. That comes in a little bit later, but for now, there is enough of a plot line going on that the reader is interested and hooked and wants to figure out why this girl is being pursued by monsters and why she's so important and what has happened to her memory. Now, with the next question, I really need you guys to be very introspective and examine your work and think through this. Is your prologue / opening chapter directly relevant to the story? And for a long time, you guys, mine wasn't. Probably actually like the first 5 chapters weren't. And I figured a lot of this out over time as I focused specifically on this question of, what is your plot? What is your plot? Once I had a really strong grasp on what the plot was, which, as I said, was way late in my writing process, then I ended up going back and saying, you know what? These first 5 chapters are dumb. I don't need them. They're not crucial to what is going on, and I took a lot out. I mean, tons. So then your next question is along the same lines, which is it possible to start the story closer to the inciting incident? So I want you to examine what you have for your first couple of chapters. If you know what your inciting incident is already, that's awesome. I want you to look at everything before it and really ask yourself, how much of this do I need? How much of this is critical? Because if you can take it out, if your reader is fine without it, they're probably better off without it. So if you can take it out, I recommend taking it out. And then the very last question is, what opening scene will best pull the reader into the story you want to tell? So for me, this was terrifying monsters. Halie's being pursued by people who think she might have committed a murder. There is plenty going on in that opening chapter that's gonna lead the reader into the next ones. They're not gonna get bored. The story is starting immediately. And so for you guys, I really want you to brainstorm if there is a better first chapter that you could be using, a better opening scene that starts off and is leading to the inciting incident. It's leading directly to the plot of the story that you wanna tell, and it is not a side story. So before we jump off and get started on this, I want to leave you guys with a few tips to remember, which is number 1, that the most important thing you can do for your opening is to be intimately familiar with what your plot is. That is the number 1 thing that you can do, is know what the overall story is about so that you make sure you are starting it in the right spot. The second tip is just to remember the inciting incident is really where the story starts. So you want to get to it really pretty quick, and you want to try to cut out any fluff that is happening beforehand, because we want to get to the story. That is why we're reading the book, right? We are reading for the story. So let's cut as much of the fluff as we can. Remember, the inciting incident is just what gets the plot going. It can be a traveler arriving with a quest, or an owl arriving with a piece of mail that is going to change the character's life forever. It could be the main character's sister getting chosen for a fight to the death. It could be a family member tragically dying, which causes the main character to seek a new career path. It could could be the moment when the female main character runs into the devilishly handsome male character and the romance starts. It could be your character going in for a job interview at the mystical post office, which is going to set into motion their career as a magic mailman. The possibilities for the stories that you want to tell are absolutely endless, but the inciting incident is something that is going to come up because it's what sets the plot into motion. Now, a few things to avoid before we jump in are, please don't start with a random side character with a different story. Don't start 50 years ago with a different story. And then my last thing to avoid is don't be so specifically vague that your readers don't understand what's going on. I realize that there is kind of this desire to invoke curiosity in your readers, which is a great thing, of course, but let's not do it by making the writing confusing or withholding facts that the character knows, but we're just trying to keep the reader in the dark. Readers get a little frustrated with that sort of thing when you're just deliberately being confusing about what's happening. It's okay if they don't know everything yet, of course, it's the opening chapter, but they do get a little frustrated when the reason that they don't know is because the characters are talking about things that they can't understand. There's a fine line between developing reader curiosity and developing reader frustration, and it is up to you where you want to draw that line, but do be aware that your readers may not like it. So that is everything that I have for you guys today. Enjoy doing your homework. I'm actually really excited to hop off and do this with my first chapter of my next series. There is a lot in here to unpack, and really the most important part today is just figuring out what your plot is. So go ahead and subscribe to this channel if you guys haven't already, and then I will see you guys tomorrow for day 2 of the 5-day first chapter challenge.